As the Taliban take over Afghanistan, the Chinese Communist Party sees an opportunity. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. After an incredibly botched U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Taliban have taken control of the country. For more on the situation in Afghanistan, check out the episode on my other show, America Uncovered. But since this is China Uncensored, today we're going to talk about how China is dealing with the U.S. leaving Afghanistan. As of when we recorded this episode, the Chinese Communist Party has not officially recognized the Taliban as the rulers of Afghanistan. But they did say they were ready for friendly relations with the Taliban. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Hua Chunying, said the Chinese regime respected the will of the Afghan people and called on the Taliban to implement their promise to form an open, inclusive Islamic government and take responsible actions to protect the safety of Afghan citizens. When I think of the Taliban, the first words that come to mind are open and inclusive, and especially safety. Whether or not you wanted the U.S. to leave Afghanistan, there's no denying that the execution of the withdrawal was a fiasco. And that's been a huge propaganda win for the Chinese Communist Party. It's like the Biden administration just gave the Chinese regime a propaganda Christmas. With so many propaganda presents, the Chinese leader Xi Jinping just doesn't know which one to open first. Should he open the one about how the Taliban's victory embarrasses the U.S. and smashes its image and arrogance? Or maybe the one about how President Biden's efforts to focus on China are bankrupt after what happened in Afghanistan? Oh, I know. He should open the biggest present of all, using U.S. treachery in Afghanistan to scare Taiwan. I'll talk more about Taiwan a bit later in the episode, so stay tuned. America's actions in Afghanistan could have a huge impact on China's plans for a Taiwan takeover. But first, despite enjoying the propaganda bonanza, the Chinese Communist Party is worried. Because here's a dirty little secret. The Chinese regime doesn't really want the U.S. to withdraw from Afghanistan. I'll explain after the break. Welcome back. With the inept U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, China's propaganda department is having a field day. I hope they're paid overtime. Probably not. But the reality on the ground is a bit more complicated for the Chinese regime, because they were depending on the U.S. to provide stability in Afghanistan. China shares a border with Afghanistan along the Wakhan corridor. Now, it's a tiny border, only 50 miles long, but it's still a strategically important border for China. That's because it connects Afghanistan to Xinjiang, the region where the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide against the Uyghurs, a Muslim ethnic minority. The Chinese regime now has a very different presence in Central Asia than it did 20 years ago, when the U.S. first invaded Afghanistan. For the last 2 decades, the Chinese Communist Party has been quietly extending footprints into Central Asia, especially through their flagship Belt and Road Initiative. There are more than 200 Belt and Road projects in the region. Beijing has also been expanding their private military companies in Central Asia, largely to guard those Belt and Road projects. But China's military involvement doesn't stop at those private military companies. The Chinese Communist Party has a not-so-secret military base in Tajikistan, quite close to the Afghan border. A lot of China's moves in Central Asia would not have been possible if the U.S. hadn't been in Afghanistan. The U.S. military's presence made it a lot safer for China to go into the region. So China wants the United States to withdraw from Afghanistan, but only when the withdrawal is responsible and does not leave a chaotic power vacuum that would destabilize the region. So much for that. But now that the U.S. is pulling out, the Chinese Communist Party is recalculating. Last month, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with the Taliban. The Foreign Ministry published a photo of Wang and the Taliban's deputy leader walking towards each other with open arms. Some called this China and the Taliban beginning their romance. Yeah, maybe ask Afghan women how the Taliban treat their romantic partners. Others called it more of a reluctant embrace. Although this was the most high-profile meeting between the Chinese regime and the Taliban, China has been meeting with the Taliban since 2015. China even held secret peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government. Of course, Chinese officials were meeting with the US-backed Afghan government as well. Just a week before Wang Yi met with the Taliban, Chinese leader Xi Jinping spoke with the Afghan president. Meeting with the Taliban was a way for the Chinese Communist Party to hedge their bets as the situation in Afghanistan got worse. Well, consider those bets successfully hedged. The party has two concerns about Afghanistan. The first is terrorism. The Chinese regime exaggerates the threat of Islamic terrorism in Xinjiang as an excuse for their genocide of the Uyghurs. But they also don't want any actual terrorists crossing over from Afghanistan to China. The Taliban promise they will never allow any force to use the Afghan territory to engage in acts detrimental to China. Of course, since the Chinese regime considers nonviolent Uyghurs to also be engaging in acts detrimental to China, this is also the Taliban promising not to object to China's treatment of the Uyghurs. Adding to that reassurance, the Taliban also promised not to interfere in China's internal affairs. So the Chinese Communist Party seems to have gotten what they want there, provided they trust the Taliban. The second issue that concerns the party is investing in Afghanistan. Chinese officials have talked up expanding the Belt and Road Initiative to Afghanistan. And there are definitely things that Chinese state-owned companies would love to get their hands on in Afghanistan, like trillions of dollars worth of rare earth metals. And the Taliban would love to get their hands on that kind of Chinese money. But so far, Beijing hasn't exactly run to invest in Afghanistan because it's kind of dangerous. For the whole of 2020, total Chinese foreign direct investment in Afghanistan was $4.4 million, less than 3% of that type of Chinese investment in Pakistan, which was $110 million for the same year. So far, Chinese state-owned companies have two major projects in Afghanistan, an oil project and a copper mine, and both have run into some big problems. Chinese experts have attributed those failures to the poor security environment in the country. Even in Pakistan, which is a staunch ally of the Chinese regime, Chinese companies have had security problems. A bus crash that killed and injured Chinese workers in Pakistan last month was a terrorist attack, likely committed by the Pakistani Taliban. The Pakistani Taliban was also behind another terrorist attack that nearly killed China's ambassador to Pakistan earlier this year. So given that Afghanistan is a lot more unstable than Pakistan, China is unlikely to immediately start throwing money at the Taliban. The Chinese Communist Party might not especially like the Taliban, but they do have a lot of experience dealing with an unpredictable ruler of a neighboring country. Yeah, the party is more likely to treat the Taliban like North Korea than any other ally. They can use the Taliban when it benefits them, but they don't want to get too close because the Taliban is also a little bit crazy. So it might be less of a long-term romance and more of a booty call. But although the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan is not great for China's plans in Central Asia, it's a major win for the Chinese regime somewhere else. More after the break. Welcome back. There's one way in which the Biden administration's hot mess in Afghanistan is the absolute, hands-down biggest win for the Chinese Communist Party. And that is the loss of confidence in the United States around the world, especially from allies that depend on the U.S. for military help, like much of Asia. If they see the U.S. as weak, then they could shift their allegiances to China because they feel like they have no choice. This happened with the Philippines. And that's a big reason the Chinese Communist Party has ramped up propaganda comparing Afghanistan to Taiwan, warning that what is happening in Kabul is an omen of Taiwan's future fate. Once a cross-straits war breaks out while the mainland seizes the island with forces, the U.S. would have to have a much greater determination than it had for Afghanistan, Syria, and Vietnam if it wants to interfere. Notice it says once war breaks out, not if. They're also backing up this propaganda campaign with military drills near Taiwan. This is the Chinese Communist Party waging political and psychological warfare against Taiwan. They're trying to demoralize Taiwan so the Communist Party can take the country without fighting. And they're also waging psychological warfare against the U.S., warning of unthinkable costs for the U.S. in a war over Taiwan. The message is, why bother defending Taiwan at all? Just let the Communist Party have it. But the biggest question here is this. Is the Chinese Communist Party just using America's mistakes in Afghanistan to fuel their propaganda warfare campaign? Or do Chinese leaders believe that the U.S. government is so weak right now that they would not defend Taiwan? If they do believe that, then now is the time to strike. I've talked before on the show about how the Obama administration made a huge error trusting the Chinese regime during the Scarborough Shoal standoff back in 2012. The Chinese regime breached the agreement and the U.S. did nothing. Once the Chinese Communist Party saw that, they accelerated their takeover of the South China Sea. And now the party's control over much of the South China Sea is a done deal short of war. If the Chinese Communist Party really believes they're seeing proof of the Biden administration's weakness in Afghanistan, they could move up their timeline to invade Taiwan. And if the U.S. does nothing, Taiwan and the rest of the Indo-Pacific will fall to the Chinese regime. And now, it's time for me to answer a question from one of you, a fan who supports China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Marinus Vandenberg says, no Kindle version of Gary K. Kershanik's book on political warfare. Not very helpful for dissemination of his crucial information. Marinus, I see you're a faithful listener of our podcast, China Unscripted. This week, our guest on the podcast was Gary Kershanik. We talked about how China is targeting Japan with political warfare. And Gary has written a book called Political Warfare, Strategies for Combating China's Plan to Win Without Fighting. And it's especially relevant to what I just talked about today, because his book goes into detail about China's political warfare against Taiwan. You're right that the book isn't on Kindle. Instead, it's available as a free PDF for anyone to download. I'll put a link to that free download in the description and comments below. Thanks for your comments, Marinus, and thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon. We could not do this show without you. If you're interested in supporting us, head over to patreon.com/China Uncensored. You'll get a bunch of cool perks, including the chance to have me answer your question on the show. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.